Steak with fennel. Steak with book. The name of this recipe is Steak with Book. Guys, I wrote a book and it has a steak recipe in it. No, really, that's exactly what happened. I wrote a book and it has a steak recipe in it.
And scene. Great video. Roll the bumper.
Finito. This is a giant steak. I'm going to cook it in a way that I've maybe demonstrated before. It is called the frequent turning method. It's just a salt and pepper seasoned steak. This is one of those recipes that you make when you have a great steak. Something like this, which is about 2 inches thick, beautiful marbled ribeye. This is kind of a special occasion. So if you get to it and you think of it ahead of time, salt and pepper your steak like crazy. We did that. I'm just going to do it again. Because something this thick, you really need like a good amount of seasoning on the surface. Because think about the meat that's not just on the surface, but going all the way down. You need to be seasoning for the whole steak. So this has a really nice amount of marbling, but then there are these other little pockets of fat. So one of the things I sometimes do when I get something like this is I will actually just score the fat. I'm just dragging the knife through the surface of the fat itself, not down to the meat. And sometimes I'll even like take the knife and just poke. There's a little fat cap, right? A little pocket of fat in the eye there. That's all you have to do to the steak. And if you think of it, season it, put it in the fridge overnight, put it in the fridge for a couple hours, and it will help it absorb the seasoning. Let's cook a steak. All right, so I have here a trusty cast iron pan. I'm just gonna put enough oil in the bottom of the pan to coat. One of the things that I like to do when I have a nice fatty steak like this is I'll actually start it on the fat cap. Essentially, I'm getting the fat rendering from that edge, and the fat that renders will then become the fat that the steak is cooking in. The decal, which is like that strip of meat that kind of runs around the eye, is incredibly flavorful, has terrific marbling, a perfect amount of chew. So I really want to get some action on the decal too. And you can see, I hope already, that there's just more fat in the pan. And it's starting to take a little color. You can see where I scored it. If you want to make a steak, if you're craving a steak, go talk to the butcher. And the recipe says ribeye, but what do you think? All right, so I have nice color there. It's starting to render. And I am noticing some smoke. By putting the steak down on the meaty side, it's going to lower the temperature of the pan. I can also like change the heat. That would be another way to go about it. The philosophy behind frequent turning for big chops like this is that instead of hitting it really hard on one side and then really hard on the other, when you turn it back and forth a number of times, you give it a chance to cook evenly, and you won't get that big, thick, kind of gray band on either side with medium rare in the middle. This way you get more of like a strip of well done where it's seared and then more even heat throughout the middle. Imagine you were sunbathing and you were like, in order to get the most amazing epic tan, I need 4 hours of sunbathing. If you're in the sun for 2 hours and then you go and you have lunch and then you come back, you're gonna still get tan. I'm getting like a nice amount of fat in the bottom of this pan. That is really important to me because as the steak cooks, the edges start to curl back a little bit. So part of what happens as it naturally sort of shrinks up, because the proteins are contracting, is that there's a part of the surface that now isn't touching the pan anymore because it curls back. The fat is kind of there, and having like a nice little pool of fat in the bottom of the pan is there to bridge the gap between the cooking surface and the protein itself. This side looks nice, but this, see like the little gray spots there? That's not as brown. And now when I turn it, I'm being a little careful. There's a lot of fat in the pan. If I just threw this guy over onto his second side, get the oil splash. All right, just out of curiosity, I'm kind of feeling this. It's very bouncy and springy. I think it's still very rare, but we don't really need to guess. we can just use the digital thermometer. And I don't want to go here because the outside edge is going to always be hotter than the middle. I want to make sure that when I get the thermometer in there, I'm getting like all the way to dead center. So just to visualize where I'm going, and also make sure you're not in a fat pocket. Yeah, this is, you would think it would be higher. 65 degrees. This is like a warm spring breeze. Remember that the curve on internal temperatures, it's always this like very kind of gradual climb, gradual climb, gradual climb, and then there's a temperature that you hit that things start going very quickly. So it's not going to increase in degrees at the same rate the whole time. The hotter the steak gets, the faster it will rise. So just be mindful of that. Just because it took maybe 5 or 6 minutes to get to 70 doesn't mean it's going to take the same amount of time to get twice as hot, if that makes sense. Holy mother. All right, let's take a temp. Go in there. Oh my God. Hold on. That's better. Okay, I was close to the bone and it was gonna go into 125. So I'm gonna take this guy out. It was right around 110, 112. And I'm using a paper towel to wipe out some of that salt and pepper, just because I don't want it to burn. We're going to do the butter basting part. Butter is involved in butter basting. This garlic and the rosemary. And most of this is going to stay in the pan. And that's just going to be like a little bath bomb all over the steak. So steak goes back into the pan. I'm just tilting the pan up so that I make this little butter pool. And I'm picking that butter up, which now is infused with the flavor of garlic and rosemary. And I'm spooning it over. And that's it. It's just enough to finish cooking it that last few degrees. The steak is very thick. It's very hot inside. It needs to rest. It has been at the beach all day. It is exhausted. The resting is a chance for it to finish cooking through. There's some carryover, but it's also a chance for the proteins to relax again, which will let the juices flow again, which will mean it's juicy in the center. If I overcook the steak, I hate myself. I don't want to go back in time, but I've overcooked a couple steaks in my life, and then we can make our salad. I have 2 bulbs of fennel. I love fennel. It is licoricey. It is crunchy. It has the kind of water content that like celery or cucumbers has. I'm going to use all of it in this salad. Okay, so then cutting it open. Usually with fennel, it's kind of like cabbage, like that most outer layer is usually a little bit tough and fibrous. It is okay to just take that off. And then inside you can see that it's got like multiple layers that get finer and finer to the center. It's all edible. In fact, I think we've given everyone and each other the impression all this time that the core is no good. I'm trying to tell you right now, guys, there's nothing wrong with the core. It had a totally different density, crunchy, firm, delicious. And so what I'm going to get when I do this is I get kind of like a bigger half moon from the outer layer and little tender crunchy bittles from the middle. That last clove of garlic, we started with 4, 3 went into the pan. I'm just going to finely grate that because no one wants to bite into a piece of raw garlic. Okay, so this is white wine vin. This is what is in the original version of the recipe. This is a couple of anchovy fillets. Some people hate the stuff. You could use a few dashes of fish sauce if you didn't have any anchovies around. You could omit it. I wouldn't, but you could. Maybe you could add a little grated parm instead, which would have like a little bit of that saltiness and a little bit of the something that isn't just like dairy. Parm has like a salty funkiness to it that would be really, really nice with the fennel. I like the chovy, so it's got chovy. I know that the Aleppo is for the top of the steak, but if I were at home and I were making this, I might sometimes put a little Aleppo right in the guy. So I'm doing that. And it's not really going to be fully emulsified, and that's okay. This is extra virgin olive oil. I'm just going to whisk it in. Definitely want it to be a little bit salty and a little bit acidic. You're going to have a lot of fattiness and richness from the steak, so you want that to veer a little bit punchy. Actually, do we have more vinegar? Is there more vinegar? Maybe it's just my palate today. But I feel like it could take more vinegar. So this raises an important point. You have to taste your food. Don't, as much as you want to trust me, you can't trust me and you can't trust anybody else. When you're cooking a recipe, it needs to please you. Pretty much any author, any recipe developer is going to tell you that you have to taste your food as you go. And you have to get it to a place where you like the way it tastes. Now I've got a little bit of the like back here. I'm getting the acidity of like the woo, and that's what I wanted. So make sure the steak is okay before I add the fennel to the dressing. Steak is rested, very juicy, looking really good. The little bit of drippings I'm going to add to the salad, so don't throw those out. So I'm going to do the carving in a couple steps. So just starting from the top. Okay, so then you can see there's like the eye. There's the eye. There's that decal, little edgy decal there. And then we have the triangle below canal.
The tribebone. The triangle below the bone.
Triangle below the bone. And then the only hard thing about the rest of this, slicing the steak, is finding the grain and cutting against it, which means, but there's proteins that are running kind of in these strips, and you need to find which way that they're going and take a look. So sure, they like make some meanders, they're not perfectly straight, but the grain is going this way. I don't want to cut this way because then I'll end up with like long ropey fibers of protein. You want to cut across. You're cutting those strands into smaller pieces. That makes it really palatable. There will be chew, but not chewy, if you know what I mean. So I'm going to just have my knife there and start cutting across. Oh, it's lovely. And then when I get here, usually just because there's that little ring of fat there, I might actually cut that out. But it does end up on the cutting board. So what happens in the kitchen is usually by this point there's like 4 different people who are totally happy to risk like bodily injury to like get onto the steak. So this is the decal, also has a grain to it. And I'm cutting those up into just the perfect little Scooby snacks. Okay. Have our dressing. Mixy. But yeah, before I do that, do a little flaky salt. And as soon as you cut the steak, it's going to start to oxidize and cool down. This is Aleppo pepper, which I like for just a little bit of heat. You could do a little crushed red pepper flakes, a little black pepper, unless you don't like it, in which case don't use it. Fennel. I'm going to use the world's... I'll salt it a little more too. Did I even salt the dressing? Oh my god, now that I think of it. I might not have. No wonder it tastes a little flat. World's greatest salad tossers. The human hand. I don't know if I really want to cover that steak up. I'm feeling very proud. So maybe we'll just serve salad on the side. Butter-basted ribeye with a crunchy fennel salad, I think is what I called it. Just whatever you do, if you are the human that cooked the steak and did it properly, then you are the human who gets the decal and the bone. So just let everybody know as you sit down at the table. So I'm going to take this guy, and then I'm going to go over here to Decal Mountain and take one of those guys and a little bit of salad. I want to get some and some, and I'm getting a bite of salad with my bite of steak. Pretty big bite. Crunchy, fatty, rich, fresh, salty, sassy, savory. Together, they really work out Who wrote this cookbook? What? Is this from a cookbook? Oh my God, whoever wrote this cookbook is just really understands the classics of the crunchy and the fatty and the juicy and the fresh and the fronds. I love fennel. It's not lettuce. It stands up and it fights back. Oh, I'm just trying to imagine anyone watching this not making a gross joke because of all the times I said bone.
Yeah.
So I know that you're out there, and I think that you're being kind of gross.